So Modern Warfare 2 has now been out for probably 3 or 4 days as I'm recording this, and I wanted to give you guys my initial thoughts on the game as a whole, but rather than doing it as a full-on review, because that is going to be pretty long, I've got a lot to say about the game, I thought I'd actually split it up into 2 videos. This one is obviously going to be focused on all of the good stuff about the game. I've got a lot of really positive things to say about Modern Warfare, and then in probably 3 or 4 days from now I will be uploading the everything bad about Modern Warfare 2, because I do also have a lot of negative things to say about this game, and it kind of just saves you guys not having to listen to me complain about Modern Warfare 2 for 15 to 20 minutes in the next video if you guys don't want to hear that. So if you want like a full-on, you know, all of my thoughts, be sure to keep your eyes peeled for that second video. But today we're going to be talking about all of the good stuff in Modern Warfare 2. Before we get into it, if you guys are new to the channel, then definitely hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications. But with that being said, let's get stuck into all of the good stuff in Modern Warfare 2. So the first thing that I wanted to touch on, and this is kind of like the main thing that I'm really kind of actually addicted to in Modern Warfare 2, and that is the overall gunplay. Now, to be completely fair, not all of the gunplay is amazing. There's a lot of stuff in terms of like muzzle flash, and there's a lot of smoke and stuff coming from the weapon that kind of like blocks your view a lot of the time, and you can actually lose your target while you're shooting at them, which, you know, that kind of thing shouldn't happen, and hopefully they will tune that. But overall, I think the gunplay is really solid, and once you get the hang of sort of how it bounces around and all that kind of thing, I think it is arguably some of the best gunplay that I've ever played in any game, and I've obviously been playing shooters for a very long time. I think it's definitely up there. I'm not going to say it's the very best or anything like that, but so far it is, yeah, it feels really good, and it's kind of the one thing, or not the one thing, but it's probably the main thing in this game that I'm kind of like addicted to, and when I've got a bit of spare time, I'll start getting really excited to play the game, mostly because the gunplay and just the general gameplay loop is very fun. They've definitely gone for a bit more of like a realistic approach, which that was much the same with Modern Warfare 2019. It's a lot more realistic in just the way that the weapon bounces around, and it just kind of looks a bit more like what a weapon would look like in real life compared to a lot of games in the past in Call of Duty, or even, you know, even using Battlefield 2042 as an example. Those games have a lot less like visual recoil, and they're a little bit easier to sort of handle your weapon, which gameplay wise I think is perfectly fine. I really like the Battlefield gunplay, but you can definitely tell with Modern Warfare 2 they've kind of gone for that more like realistic approach, which again, that was the same case with Modern Warfare 2019, so it's definitely no surprise they went down that path. It does take quite a bit to get used to, but like I said, I overall very much enjoy it. It's definitely not perfect. I hope that they do kind of try and tone down the camera shake just a little bit, and, you know, get rid of some of that muzzle flash, because there are genuinely times when I'm shooting at someone and I actually do not know where they are, and I've never really experienced that in a shooter before. But outside of that, I think the gunplay is pretty damn solid. Now, the next thing I wanted to touch on is just the general graphics of this game. This is a game that you can definitely tell is for next gen. Black Ops Cold War and Vanguard, I don't think they looked bad by any means, but obviously they were made for next gen, but they didn't feel necessarily like next gen games, whereas this game, you can tell this is like the first, I guess, true next gen Call of Duty. And I know that's not necessarily the case, because the previous 2 were as well, but this was the first one that I'm looking around the maps and I'm going like, wow, this is actually really like very good looking. So I know graphics aren't everything, and for me personally, I don't, you know, I'm not that worried about the graphics. Call of Duty graphics for me have always looked a little bit like arcadey, and I just don't care. Like, as long as the game plays well, I don't really care that much for the graphics. But kind of the same again with Modern Warfare 2019. The graphics of this game just look very realistic, I guess, and especially like the lighting. There's a few maps that have just absolutely beautiful lighting. I forget the name of the map. There's one map that has like a sort of sunset over to the corner of the map, and if you look over there, it's just absolutely crazy how real it actually looks. So like I said, overall the game looks absolutely stunning. Now, moving on, the next thing that I've got on the list, which is kind of like a weird choice here, because I'm not actually even sure if I do like it, which is going to sound weird because I'm putting it in the video of all the good things, but the progression system for this game is actually really interesting. Like I said, I'm not actually sure if I'd love it or hate it. I actually don't know yet, but I think just the fact that it is a little bit different, and it's kind of like a different type of progression than previous games, it just feels nice and fresh, which is something that generally doesn't happen in Call of Duty. It's kind of just the same thing every single year, and so I think that's why I'm kind of leaning towards the fact that I like it, because it is just simply different from previous games. Now, obviously in previous Call of Duty games, and essentially just any game ever made that has any sort of progression, you have like your player level, and then, you know, you get to say level 20 and you unlock a new weapon, and then when you use that weapon, you unlock the attachments for that weapon. That's how it has pretty much worked in every Call of Duty. And then, yeah, it just kind of works that way in every single game. Now, in this game, it is a little bit different. There are a few weapons that are unlocked through your general player level, but then there's a lot of weapons that are actually unlocked by leveling up other weapons, and it's kind of weird how it's laid out. So for example, there are certain like AK-47 variants where to unlock the second variant, you have to get the main AK-47 to like level 13, for example. Then you unlock that next variant, and then to unlock another variant, you have to get that second variant to like level 10. So that sounds super confusing, and to be honest, it absolutely is confusing. But I think just the fact that it is a little bit different is the part that I like, because obviously in previous games and essentially just every Call of Duty and every shooter ever, like you just level up and you get some guns, and then you level those guns up to get their attachments. And the fact that it is a bit different in this game, I kind of do actually like it. Now, the part that I said how, you know, I'm not sure if I love it or hate it, I think for this COD, I do like it, but I think if they were to stick with this permanently, then I don't think I like it. I think if this was how it was, you know, moving forward for the next 10 Call of Duties, I think I very much don't like it. So it's kind of a weird one, because I think it objectively isn't as straightforward and simple and logical as the previous progression system. But like I said, I think just the fact that it's different is the reason that I like it. So it's kind of a weird one. Like I said, I kind of don't like it, and I've put it in the light category, but just the fact that it feels fresh is definitely a positive, which is something you just generally don't get with Call of Duty. Now, something else this game does really well, which is kind of surprising for me personally, because I do hear this from a lot of other people, but at least for me, I don't generally get immersed in Call of Duty games. They're generally very arcadey to me. I've never really played Call of Duty and thought like, wow, this looks, you know, very real. I guess, again, Modern Warfare 2019 a little bit, but all of the older Call of Duties and stuff, Black Ops Cold War, I never played those games and thought like, wow, this kind of looks and sounds and feels pretty realistic. But with this game, I think it's probably the most immersive and like realistic Call of Duty that I've ever seen. Now, in terms of like the sound design and stuff, when you hear, you know, an enemy airstrike come in and you look and you see the explosions and stuff, that to me, like, that is the most realistic that I've ever seen Call of Duty. And it gives you some of those like Battlefield moments where previously Call of Duty just couldn't do that, but now like I'm seeing a lot of moments where I'm like, wow, that was actually like, that was what's typically referred to as an only in Battlefield moment. Now, they're not quite as like crazy as that, because for example, you don't see people like jumping out of a plane and shooting a rocket launcher at another plane. But just in terms of like the big explosions and stuff, and like seeing a tank get blown up, like that has never really struck me in the previous games. They've obviously always had airstrikes, but when you see them happen, I've never really thought, wow, that looks really cool. But in this game, they actually genuinely look awesome and they sound awesome. So that's a big change for me, that I never actually thought that was going to be the case, but it definitely feels very immersive, especially compared to pretty much every Call of Duty in the past. Now, the final thing on my list is one that a lot of people probably don't care about, to be honest, but for me, it's actually a pretty important thing, and this is the soundtrack. This game has honestly one of the best soundtracks that I've ever heard in Call of Duty, let alone multiplayer gaming. It's probably not on the level of a lot of like single player games, and a lot of the reason for that is, for example, a game like The Last of Us that has a great soundtrack, and because you become so attached to the characters, you kind of get like a bit of extra attachment to the soundtrack because they kind of are linked to the characters, if that makes sense. Whereas in multiplayer games, you generally don't get that kind of like nostalgia, or you do get nostalgia, but I'm not sure if you guys know what I mean. It's single player games almost always have better soundtracks to me, I think, because I actually like care about the characters and it kind of just feels linked with those characters. But the soundtrack for this game is actually amazing, and I'm gonna throw it straight out there. I think it is the best soundtrack in any Call of Duty ever, and I know that's a big call because I know some of the old Call of Duties, they had absolutely amazing themes, and some of the old games like Black Ops and the original Modern Warfare and Modern Warfare 2, there were some banger soundtracks back then, but I honestly think this is the best soundtrack we've ever had in a Call of Duty game, and for me, it's probably up there as one of the best soundtracks in any multiplayer game outside of probably Halo, because obviously the Halo soundtrack is just absolutely goated. But for me, it's like, it's probably better than any Battlefield soundtrack, maybe not so much Battlefield 1, but the fact I'm even comparing it is really all I need to say. So like I said, to a lot of people that probably doesn't matter, but I don't know why, for me, I always pay massive attention to the soundtrack, and I feel like when a game has a really good soundtrack, it kind of just like builds in nostalgia to that game that if the game doesn't have a good soundtrack, you just don't really get. I don't know if that makes any sense. It's kind of the same thing. You guys will know I'm a big Star Wars fan. Star Wars is great regardless of the soundtrack, but because it has a really good soundtrack, it kind of makes the movies better, if that makes sense. So it's kind of that same situation. It doesn't need a good soundtrack soundtrack to be a good game, but I think when it does have a really good soundtrack, it just somehow makes the game even better. So those are probably the main areas that I'm really enjoying with this game. And like I said, there's a lot of stuff about this game that is really good, and these areas are like really, really good. They're not just like pretty decent. I think all of the stuff that I listed, again, maybe not so much the progression, but the gunplay and all of that, it's really good. Like, it's up there with some of the best that I've ever seen. And so I do have a lot of positive stuff to say about this game. Now, unfortunately, I've also got a lot of negative stuff, like I said earlier. I'm going to save that for this video because this is just a nice, happy, positive video, and I'll put that in its own video later in the week. So like I said, be sure to keep your eyes peeled for that. But that is going to do it for this one, guys. If you guys do have a lot of stuff that you like or dislike, be sure to leave your own thoughts down in the comment section. It's always really fun when a new game, and especially a new Call of Duty launches, to just hear what everyone thinks of it, because they're often very divisive. I hear people saying it's the best COD ever and the worst COD ever, so it's always fun to just hear everyone's opinion, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of very different opinions down in the comment section. But with that being said, thank you all very much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll see you all out there on the battlefield.